Hello everyone and welcome to our next video. In the previous video we added the duplicated email error, and we also, not in the last video but in the last two videos, we added the duplicated email, the tests related to this duplicated email custom error, and also some updates. So for example, now in the user model, if there is already an existing user, we throw a new duplicated email error instead of throwing a generic error. This also happens in the signup route. And this is, of course, not the best way of handling this at the moment, because failing saving the user in the database may happen for other reasons as well, right? So not only because there is a duplicated email, but also for other internal reasons. Maybe the database is down, and when we try to create and commit that creation in the database, we get an error message, an internal server error message or something. So we could expand on this a little bit, but for the moment, I think that we get the idea, right? So for me now, it's important, if you get the idea, the concept that I have in my head, that it's much easier and it's much more scalable if we have specific custom errors that we throw every time there is a problem in our system, right? So you see that the error that comes from this throw statement is different than the error that comes from this throw statement. So the system and any other client that is querying or interacting with our system here would be able to identify based on the specifics of each of these errors. Of course, in the end, this is treated by the error handler middleware by parsing this error, and in this case we have the same error code. But if we start having, for example, different error codes that are going to be populated within our custom error classes, then this will also make it much easier for our clients consuming our API to handle error states. And by clients, I mean not only, here in this case, I'm not developing this application for external users to directly query the API, but even if this was the case, like external users directly querying our API with like a a software as a service approach, where we have a bunch of endpoints that provide functionality to our users. This would be clients, of course, but not only them, right? So we will have other services which will interact with the authentication service, or for example, the first one being our client, so our React application that we'll start developing in a couple of videos. But there may be also other, for example, a mobile app or some other type of application that also wants to make use of this authentication service. And it doesn't even need to be the social media app, can be other app. So say that we start developing another app, like a productivity app, and we want to allow users with the same account or with one account in our authentication service to interact with both applications. So there will be a variety of clients that may be consuming this service, and I don't think it's a good practice for services to call directly other services, so I would stay away from that. Normally people would say, or you could say, okay, other services directly querying the authentication service, they also could be considered clients. But in general, we don't take this approach when we start with microservices, right? So the communication within microservices would happen in an asynchronous fashion via emitting and consuming messages. And we don't need to, in this setup, we don't need to directly query a specific microservice. We can subscribe to the message streams or to the event streams, and then we will get inevitably, or at some point in time, if we ensure at least once delivery, at some point in time we'll get all the messages that are emitted by the authentication service. But in any case, bottom line is it's much easier to handle errors when we know their shape in advance, and we don't need to deal with a generic error. In this video, what I wanted to do is a little bit of updates to this part of the code. And why is it so? It's because well, we will have an event-driven approach, right? At some point in time, we will switch to using events. And I would like to start adding them, even if they don't add a lot of value now. I would like to at least start thinking in terms of what is going on in the system, which kind of events are being triggered if I'm performing some action in a certain route or in a certain part of the system. So let's add a very simple event here when a new user signs up, right? So within my source folder, I'll create a new folder, and that's going to be called events. And events are nothing more than classes, to be honest. So there is no big deal here at the moment. Maybe later on we will customize them in a certain way, but they will be in the end classes, right? And as such, we can already start defining at least a very basic shape that we would like to expand in the future. And this could be, for example, one event that I can think of is that when the user is correctly saved in the database. So if this operation doesn't fail, then I have a new event. And this event is user signed up, right? So this is a new event. So something happened in my system. Then here, for example, instead of throwing a new duplicated email, I could actually create a new user sign up failed. And here I could receive some error, right? So then I actually have a more event-driven approach for our application. But for the moment, I want to focus on the first one. And then regarding errors and how to handle errors in this application using events, I think we'll postpone this a little bit. For the moment, if anything throws in here, then we'll simply not emit the event user signed up, right? We'll simply return some error message to our client, and we'll say it was not possible to sign you up. And for the system internally at the moment, there is no consequence if a user doesn't sign up. So if maybe some let's say monetary transaction fails, then this has some consequences to some previous actions that we did in our system. Then we need to be aware of that failed transition or of that failed event. But if the user doesn't sign up, nothing else happens in our system. We don't really need to delete some information from the database because the information will not be saved in the first place. So we just need to return something to the user in the client to inform, okay, wait, this was not successful because of this and this problems, right? So the event that we are interested in and the event that will actually cause some changes in the system state in the future is the new user or is the user signed up event. So let's implement this in this video. I'll start with the tests, and this is going to be user signed up.test.ts. And the first test I want to have is, and probably this is going to be, I think, the only test that we'll have for the moment. It should expose only the ID, only the ID and the email when serializing to REST. And what do I mean by should expose only the ID and the email when serializing to REST? Is that what I have in mind is that once we create this event, we will send it back a response with our user signed up event dot serialize REST or something like this. All right, so this would be a serialization of our event information to our REST API that is going to be sent back to the client. Now, this is a very simple event. And for the moment, we will actually, let's avoid changing the code for the moment. And I will write down this only test. And I cannot think, or maybe we could do some self-validating tests in the way that we could say, okay, it should store the user internally and return the user when the get user method is called, for example. But that's self-validating, right? What we are interested here, the test that adds the most value for us, is how does the information within my event is communicated to the external world. So for this, what I have to do is I need to, of course, create a user, right? So my user, let's call it new user, is going to be equal to await, and that's an async function, and it's going to await the user dot create, and is going to be with a valid email, test@test.com, and with a valid password of valid123, right? So everything should still be passing. Let me start my test suite. Yes. So now what I want to have here is I want to have my serialized REST. Serialized REST representation could be, or for short here, just serialized REST. And I'm going to call a method in our, actually, wait, there's something missing here. We still don't have the event, right? So you cannot call the method in the event. So here I want to have a const user signed up event, and it's going to be new user signed up with the new user information here. And of course now it's going to fail because I don't have my event, so I need to go back to my code and I need to start implementing my events. So now I can finally write some production code. So instead of going directly and writing the user signed up event, what I want to do is I want to write a BaseAuthEvent, which is going to be similar as our base custom error, in the sense that it is an abstract class that is exported from our from our file, and this is going to be extended then by our actual event. And for the moment I want only one method, right? That serialize REST method. So that serialize REST method, and this is going to return an object. But in TypeScript, we normally represent objects by saying that they are records of string with an unknown property, right? In our case here, it could be string, but because it can also be numbers or nested objects, we can leave this as unknown. Now, the serialize REST here, I could actually make this a little bit more efficient, and I will actually add a generic here. And I'm going to say that once I serialize to REST, I want to have this generic as my response, right? So if I extend the BaseAuthEvent, then I need to pass some, and I can default this to unknown. So if nothing is passed, the serialized REST is going to be an unknown output. But if I pass a generic, this generic is going to be the shape of the type or the shape of the object that is returned by the serialized REST method. So now I can create my new class, and this new class is the user signed up event. And within the user signed up event, what I will do is I will just import the base event, right? Import the, what is it, BaseAuthEvent? Exactly, BaseAuthEvent from .BaseAuthEvent. And I also want to import the user document from our models folder. And here I want to define the REST payload, right? So what is the REST payload? So the REST payload is the shape of the object that will be sent whenever I call serialize REST. So this is exactly that generic that we need. So user signed up REST payload. And this is going to be composed by an ID, which is a string. And in Mongo, it's always a string. So let's leave it as a string, and the email, which is also a string, right? So here now I have the basics for actually creating my class. So I will export default class UserSignedUp extends my BaseAuthEvent, and I will pass to my BaseAuthEvent the UserSignedUp REST payload. Right, so now you will see that once I implement, so I need to have a constructor, right, to begin with. And here I need to have a serialize REST method. And it directly types this as the user signed up REST payload. So which other information do I need here? Well, I need my user, so I need to somehow store this user here, but I will store it as a private. Actually, I think we are going a little bit beyond the scope of the test, because now I have the user sign up, but I still don't have the new user, right? So it's still failing, and I would like to continue a little bit the implementation. So here I'll have my private user as an instance of a user document, and I need to initialize this user by passing it to the constructor. So here I will receive a user document, and then I call super, and I inform this.user is equal to user. And now everything is working just fine. So let's see here. I think that now the test should pass, but it will complain about this TypeScript. I think that is not going to, not sure if the test will fail. Yeah, it's going to fail because it's complaining that undefined is not assignable to the type of REST payload, and that's fine for us. We can quickly solve this by returning as an ID. This is going to be this.user.id, right? Like this. And an email is this.user.email. Good. So the interesting thing with this type of, or with this example of typing, is that I have a base authentication event that I can extend, and I can dynamically type it as necessary in my custom events, right? So maybe this would be the case that in the BaseAuthEvent I would have some, let's say, private information here that I also want to make it a generic so that it can be customized by the subclasses. But for the moment, I think that this is already enough for us. So in the sense that what I mean by customizing by the subclass is that, for example, let's say the argument of the first, or the type of the first argument in the constructor, maybe I want to make this a generic so that I don't need to be repeating this user document and this user document here, right? But because user is really specific of the user signed up, maybe I have other types of events in the authentication that they don't need to receive the user themselves. They are just like sending some information to the external world. Maybe this user will not always be necessary. And if we start trying to bundle everything together under the same very generic case in the BaseAuthEvent, then this BaseAuthEvent loses a lot of its specialization power, in the sense that I'm not able to enforce anything via typing, because I need to always be, okay, it may be the case, it may be the case, it may be the case, and then I can never ensure that a certain guideline or that a certain process is strictly followed in our implementation. So with this, now I have my serialized REST method, and I think that this will be good enough for our tests to pass at the moment. Of course, we're not done with the test. We'll come back to the test now. But because I already had to implement this user signed up REST payload return here, then our tests will inevitably pass, right? Because everything that I want to do now is I want to make sure that the keys are the same. So the keys that I am expecting here should expose only the ID and the email, and when serializing to REST. So I would expect my object.keys for my user signed up event dot sorry, not exactly, the user signed up event dot serialize REST, right? So maybe I can actually move this to another variable, because serialized response is going to be this, because then I can directly call it in here, serialize response. And here I'm going to do something that is just to ensure that the sorting is the same, right? And why is it so? Because sometimes Jest complains about the sorting of our algorithm or of our arrays. So I'm just going to sort both of them and make sure that if they are the same when they are sorted, it means that they are contained, or one is contained in the other and the other is contained in one, meaning they are equal in terms of the elements. Maybe the order is not the same, but it doesn't matter for us. We are interested only in the elements. And as you can see here, I'm already defining how I want the ID to be called. If you noticed here, I have Mongoose by default, or Mongo by default. It attaches an underscore ID to the element or to the entity that was just created, but we want this to have a more universal representation, and that would be just ID. So with this in mind, I also want to have another test here. I would expect the serialized response.email to equal the to equal test at test.com, right? To equal test at test.com. And this first expect here, this is going to actually also prevent us from exposing any additional field. If we come to this representation and we try to say password this.user.password, this is gonna complain, right? It's gonna complain. It's strongly typed here, and I'm not able to expose sensitive information. So this is also a security mechanism for us while developing, to ensure that we don't expose any unwanted information. So let me create here an index.ts, and I will export the default as UserSignedUp from UserSignedUp. And then here I will make a small refactoring in our signup route. And I just want to, instead of sending this hard-coded body, I want to create a user signed up event, and that's going to be a new user signed up, and it's going to receive the new user, right? So here, then what I can do is I can actually, maybe even the status code we could move to the authentication event, right? So this could also be protected abstract. That is going to be the status code, and this is a number, right? So now the user signed up, and here I will have a method to get this status code, right? I need to have a method. Let's abstract get status code, and this returns a number. So now the class here, it should start to fail, right? So I think that now the tests are going to start failing, or at least the validation here is going to start to fail, because I don't have the correct implementation. It's missing a get status code. So I will create again here a protected status code, and this status code is going to be equal to 201, right? Because the user is always created on sign up. And then I have get status code, and I return this dot status code. Now the test should start to pass, and here I want again to expect the user signed up event dot get status code dot to equal 201. Right, so I'm just formalizing this requirement in the test. Maybe I should have written this before, but yeah, that's not a problem. Let's not be that strict. So now I can come back to my sign up route, and now I have my new user signed up. So here I'll say user signed up dot get status code, and I will send the user signed up dot serialize rest. Maybe the names will change in the future. That is not a big deal at all. Maybe even the structure of our events is going to change. And for sure, this is going to change, right? Because here we have duplicated transactions. So we are both saving the user to the database, and we are also having to emit an event. And what if I manage to save the user, but I fail to emit the event? And that's a problem, right? So we want to have something that is atomic. And I'm pretty sure that we will go with event sourcing at the moment. But for now, it would be too much overkill. I just want us to start thinking in terms of event or events that happen in our application, so that when we need to introduce them, it's not a very hard mindset transition, right? So let's save this and let's see if the tests are still passing, because refactoring should also make the tests pass. Nothing should fail. And yes, everything is passing. So that is it for this video, actually, in terms of code. So I'll just adjust a little bit the imports here. I would like to have a user signed up, and now everything should still be working just fine. It takes a little bit in the beginning because it needs to set up it needs to do a little bit of setup, but then you see that the tests are actually quite fast to pass. So let me run the prettier fix command, and now let's see the linting command. I mean, I just prefer to run it before actually running the commit, because it may be the case unexpected dangling in yeah, but this we need to turn off, because by default the user underscore ID is dangling right from Mongoose. So I think that the no underscore dangle, it will have to be removed. Let me have a look here. I can even find some exceptions, but some customizations where I can say exactly allow specifiers. So we will do it like this. So we will type this rule as no underscore dangle, and we will allow this underscore bar here, right? Then where is it? It's in the ESLint.js. Now I will have the no underscore dangle, and that's going to be an error, but I will allow, it's going to be an error, but I will allow underscore ID. So the underscore ID is allowed, and this should close here, and then I should close also this. So let's see what happens now with our linting. Let's see if this is fixed and if we can actually have exactly. So now we have the underscore ID. That's not a problem. Good. Then I will commit the changes. That is feed in the authentication, and we have implemented the user signed up event. Good. I will push the changes. I will add the link to the commit in the video description, and in the next video we will finally continue with our encryption of the password. Thank you very much for your time, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.